Hello, and welcome to the St. Lawrence's College podcast. I'm Connor, and it has certainly been an unprecedented year. People are getting sick of that word, but it seems like the most adequate adjective that I can think of to describe 2020. Australia was on fire for a bit, there were floods, and now we're in the midst of the COVID-19 global pandemic. It's affected everyone. People have lost their jobs, people have been unable to do the things that they love, people have been unable to travel, and it even affected us here at school. For a while there, we were learning at home through online learning. For some, it was overwhelming to receive your work for the week at the beginning of the week in one large, lengthy email. And for many, that was quite overwhelming to see all of it just sitting there in front of you on one day, and you're like, oh my God, this is so much work. For some, it was brilliant. I know for me personally, I really enjoyed it because I'm in year 12 and I got to work on my assessment for as long as I wanted. So I got to do my assignments until A, I got tired of them, or B, I had to go to another check-in with a teacher or something like that. And so on that front of online learning, my guest today is the St. Lawrence's College principal, Mr. Leadbetter. Mr. Leadbetter, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Connor.
So before schools were closed, the college had to be prepared for any situation, a what if, no matter how unlikely it sounded. So what was that process like in developing that what if scenario?
The process was quite difficult at the start, Connor, because no one really knew what COVID-19 was and no one really knew the effect that it had. So we were always taking advice from initially the Queensland government, and that advice changed all the time. So you'd start to plan for something and then it would change as to what you needed to do. One of the things that was the game changer was the understanding that young people were less likely to be infected or to indeed die. So, and if they were infected, they'd have low-level symptoms. So that came out very early. So we worked out that the staff were the most vulnerable. So when we were planning for that, we had to work out who was the most vulnerable and how we were going to risk manage the environment for them. And then the second thing, so the people came first, let's see how safe we can get them. The second thing was how we're going to make sure people are learning as well, because you would know that some staff can whiz-bang with computers and technology, and some, perhaps like the principal, are not as good. So we had to do a lot of upskilling and work out a professional development program with that. So that was how it began. It evolved over time, and we're able to talk to other schools about what they were doing. Made us feel more comfortable.
Yeah. So who was involved in that process? Was that just you and the college leadership team, or did that involve specific department heads?
Yeah, look, initially it was actually the principals group dealing with Queensland Catholic Education and the Queensland Government. So it started there, and then once we got the information, we went to the leadership team, and people like Mr. Glasbrook and Miss Gunn and all those, they developed and helped develop the professional development program. But the heads of faculty led what was happening in their department. Mm-hmm. So they would say, for example, in geography, this is the platform we'll use. In science, we'll use this other platform. And that was great. And the other group that were really, really influential were the ground staff, the janitors, the cleaning staff that we employ here, and those maintenance type people as well. And if you were here, you would have noticed that we had like tuck shop ladies cleaning. We had sports staff taking supervisions. These are not teachers, but school officers. So people were redeployed so they didn't have to be laid off.
Mm-hmm. And in that what-if scenario, what was your most extreme
The
one?
most extreme scenario was a positive test of a member of our community, and the government just kept saying, ring them and follow their guidelines. We wanted a bit more than that.
Yeah.
So we had a plan that we wrote for a positive test at the school, either one when we were back or one when most students were at home. That's a staff member a student. That was the school closure was our biggest worry, particularly after we came back. And Connor, it still is. It still is our biggest worry.
So how do you think online learning as a whole went?
Oh, look, I was proud of two groups, the staff, because I had staff that were very, very jumpy around Teams and using OneNote and all of that. And a lot of the younger staff worked with them and reassured them it was okay. So some of the staff in 6 days of prep did more work than in 6 years to get themselves ready. It was great. The second group were the students. We made a decision really early. Any boy not learning at home was vulnerable. So mum or dad or both could send them in. And we had a number of boys coming in that because they weren't coping. Mum and dad may have been at home, but they weren't coping with their learning. So the student learning, particularly in senior school, I think was a real... We got a lot of messages out of the process. And the feedback that Mr. Cook and Mr. Herbert have done has been really helpful as well.
Were you surprised by how well the process went overall?
Yes. One of the things we decided not to do earlier was have scheduled classes for each of the timetable lessons. Now, politically, everyone would say, well, why are we paying if the teacher's not there on time? But it worked out that the students actually enjoyed blocks of time and then being able to check in with the teacher with their learning. One student said in his feedback, it was great to do the work without the teacher getting in the way. So I thought that was a little message for me. And for me, there was a group, maybe grade 5 and 7, that were new. They struggled more than anyone else. 5's being younger and new, and 7's half of those being new. So we gave them a week's worth of work. And to be truthful, Connor, some of them freaked out.
Yeah.
Because they looked, what am I doing over a week? I can't do that. They didn't realise they used to do that in a week anyway.
Yeah.
And initially, most of our teachers gave extra work. And it wasn't clear to families that do the work you can, we're giving you more than what we would give in a normal lesson. So we had to get that message back out, and some of the staff reduced the amount of schoolwork they sent. Yeah.
So it's been said by a large number of Year 12 students that they enjoyed this process because it allowed more time to work on assignments until they're finished. Is this being considered as like a permanent addition to the Year 12 program? Because it seemed to work very well for them.
Mainly in senior school. So next year I've asked for more doubles to start with, more double lessons, because it seems you enjoyed the block of time. The other thing we're looking at, it won't be for next year but the year after, is what is the length of our school day and what does it look like? So we've been 8:30 to 3 o'clock probably for 100 years. Is that the best model? Some studies say that boys your age go best after 10 o'clock.
I can certainly concur.
And perhaps work later into the evening. So, but there are some practicalities as well if you have a brother here and those types of things. And most of our students will do something like you're doing, the co-curricular, after hours, before hours. So how do we meld that in? We think in primary and middle school there needs to be a fairly strong structure, but we think we can release that when they hit year 10 and 11, and certainly in 12. And as you would know, you've lost an assessment task.
Yes.
And I think a lot of our boys will finish their school internal assessment this term.
Yes, exactly.
So they've got a term and a bit to get ready for one assessment task at the end of in October. So our challenge there will be to keep you all engaged, but also to make sure that the work we're doing is really helpful for your external test, because generally you would have had another item.
I remember when that was announced that it was going to be, that IA3, the internal assessment, the third piece, was going to be removed. At morning tea, everybody was very excited. They're like, one less assessment. Yeah. Then by lunchtime, people were like, oh goodness, this means things are necessarily worth more.
That's right.
Do you think Year 12s are disadvantaged academically because of that?
No. I'm on a committee at the Queensland Curriculum and Assessment Authority, and they're applying a formula. It's called the RASH formula. So I won't go into it, mainly kind of because I can't really understand it myself. But that formula means that assessment tasks are scaled against each other or compared to each other, and I think you'll be actually advantaged. I think what boys are worried about is if they did IA1, and didn't go that well, and then they're dropping an IA, but they're going to compare IA 1 and 2 just to see if there's any anomalies, etc., in that system. And the percentage for the final exam is not changing. So in media, I think it's 25%. In science, like physics, it's 50%.
Yes.
So that's going to stay the same. The government has made every attempt to make sure that your year level is not disadvantaged in any way. From that point of view, I think you'll actually be advantaged. So, yeah.
So when you say they're comparing those two internal assessments, what are they, when they look for an anomaly, what will happen then if they see you've gotten a lower mark on IA2, then and then IA1 is higher? What will they do then?
They'll actually change marks.
Okay.
Yep. And one of the things they'll also do is when we send our work away for the confirmation period, that's really onerous. That's the toughest in Australia for the work you do internally. So our government's done a great job in making sure that you can compare a C or a 12 out of 20 at St Lawrence's with a 12 out of 20 at a state government school out in the bush.
Yeah. So co-curricular programs are restarting. What new hygiene procedures are happening there to ensure that people are safe?
We have 2 stages with the co-curricular. So they are requirements of numbers, of social distancing, cleaning, etc. We will have to clean at the end of each match if it's indoors. So, for example, if it's a basketball fixture, we would run a schedule and have a 15-minute break, and there'd be a cleaning of those chairs that people sit on.
Yes.
And then the next group they may be coming in, but they'll be cleaned while they're there. And then there'll be the can't share water bottles, got to sanitise hands, need to go home and shower if you're coming back and all that sort of thing. Mr. Wallace has been spending hours upon hours on that, and he's read everything. So our process will be clear. The only final thing I'd say is we need to know who's here. So, for example, on a Saturday morning, if we had a basketball positive case, we need to be able to contact everyone that's visited. The music is also happening, but they're spaced and socially distanced, and they're in smaller groups at the moment. So the big band and all those are not rehearsing all together, but that will recommence at some stage.
And because of that increased cleaning around those sport matches, are there expected to be less games in a round?
No, not necessarily. What we'll do is we'll start earlier and finish later.
Okay.
And they'll reduce the time of some quarters or halves. So if it was, and I'll get this wrong, but say it was a 12-minute quarter, it might go to a 10-minute quarter.
Okay.
And then they'll have a finals day after the round robin.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how does that new sport program schedule work? What are you looking at for details there?
The details would be at this stage, we'll start with basketball and tennis, and we'll play 3 schools. And then if we finish top of the table, we'll play who finished on top of the table at the other school. Second will play second. So a big finals round. And then there's a week break at that ECA week.
Yeah.
And then we'll move into rugby and soccer and chess, even though those boys will actually be preparing earlier. And then the cross-country carnival still will happen mid-term. And the boys, that won't be as difficult, but it just might mean that year levels come in, run and leave. What they used to do was come in, run and then watch all day.
Yeah.
So they may not be able to do that.
So finally, some students may be concerned about seeing a popping up and rising of cases down south in Victoria, about more cases potentially popping up in Queensland. What is your message to those students who might be worried about the spread in Queensland and specifically here at school?
Yeah, look, in Queensland, the cases are very low by national standards. Not the lowest, but very low. I know Victoria's experiencing issues. I would say to students there is a chance there could be an increase in cases and we might go back to stage 1 or 2. I think it's unlikely, however. My message to the students is to just have trust that we at the school, the teachers, are doing everything we can to give them as best experience as they can in this difficult time. And what I love about the 12s, they're not feeling sorry for themselves. They're actually happy to be doing sport and music and podcasts and things like that. So I think they've shown the younger boys what leadership is about. They're just getting on with the job. And that's why I'm very proud of our seniors.
Cool. Well, Mr. Leadbetter, thank you for joining us today.
Connor, thank you for the invitation. It was great.
Thank you for joining me today on the St. Lawrence's College podcast. Next time on the podcast, we'll be talking to Dean of Studies, Mr. Cook, about the ATAR system and the new QCE system, which is currently being implemented in senior school for the first time in Queensland's history, as Queensland had the last of the OP system go through last year. This year heralds a new beginning with the ATAR system of tertiary entrance scores. A lot might find it confusing, so we're going to break it down for you and just make it a little bit easier to understand, because I know certainly when I was learning about it, it was quite confusing. So I hope that we'll be able to explain that for you a little bit simpler. Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today, and I want to give another big thank you to Mr. Leadbetter for being my guest today. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.